A little bit of a newsy edition of the Shea Anything podcast coming up. We have news on the Mets and their pitching coach decision. We have news on who they're looking for a general manager or a president of baseball operations. It all starts right now. Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. It's the Shea Anything podcast. It's Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you on this episode. A reminder to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you're listening. We appreciate it. Another reminder that Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network. More people rely on only on Verizon. Weeknights, 6 o'clock on SNY. You can catch myself and Andy. Baseball night in New York. We talk about everything we talk about in this podcast on television, as well as some other fun stuff with some other fun panelists. So please check it out. So Andy, the team just announced that Jeremy Hefner will be back as their pitching coach. You knew weeks ago that they were going to retain him in some form or fashion. What's your reaction to the fact that he's, retaining his actual job?
Just a no-brainer. I mean, he's good. He's respected. He's one of the people who sort of his generation that's kind of populating the game all over in the pitching coach position. And like everyone would want him that needed a pitching coach if he were somehow available. So it's just like, that's the low hanging fruit for the Mets. Take the guy who's universally regarded as good at his job and keep him in that job. Move on. That's all.
The timing is interesting to me, Andy, and it may not be important, but they made him kind of sweat it out for a couple of weeks in terms of what his role would be. I'm guessing, thinking, okay, we'll have a manager and a GM / president of baseball operations in place to kind of sign off on what his role will be. They don't have any of that. And now they're just like, okay, yeah, it's your job.
Well, also you're 5 days away from the expiration of, I know they had an option on him that they're picking up, but he may well have been getting inquiries for permission to speak. Like if a team needed a pitching coach, if he's not one here, then the Mets have to let him talk or should let him talk to that other team. So it's kind of cleaner to just give him that job. I would be very surprised if other clubs hadn't been asking permission to speak to him. So that could involve it too.
Okay. So it feels kind of like deja vu all over again, Andy. You're doing reporting on a kind of secretive Mets interview process.
Every year.
And every time, you get what you get. And then we haven't heard mystery candidate yet, but that's coming. You just know that's coming. What's the latest? I know you had some reporting yesterday for SNY.TV on who they're talking to in the front office search. What are the names on the radar right now?
Just sort of as we've been talking about ever since the Beane and Stearns and Epstein things fell through, which is probably a general manager, possibly you make him a president of baseball ops, him or her, the president of baseball ops, if that is necessary to get permission to speak to that person. The name tossing thing gets a little silly because like someone might throw out, oh, Peter Bendix of the Rays. And you're like, oh, Peter Bendix is leaving the Rays. And we all just heard of him pretty much for the first time, unless we're super involved in the baseball league. So I think it's enough to say that there's a type, like Scott Harris of the Giants was a type. They interviewed him. He's not coming here. Move on to other types. Think 33 to 42, well-educated and a member of a successful team somewhere else. I was actually told a funny thing from someone who's been involved in these things at the commissioner's office before, that owners sometimes will literally just Google like GM candidates or assistant GMs for successful teams. And right now, or things like that, or like look on Brewers.com. All right, we couldn't get Stearns. Who's the next guy? Matt Arnold. And then before you know it, you're down to Ambassador Robin Yount or something. It's like, it's sometimes that simple. And clearly the category we're in now is like, who are the guys that work under the famous guys? And that's where we are now.
So that leads me to my next question, because if they were strictly hiring a GM and Sandy Alderson were handling the interviews, he would not have to Google and get to Robin Yount in the Brewers hierarchy on their website. He would, he knows who's well-respected. He's probably worked with a lot of these people and done deals with them, et cetera. So it is strictly Steve Cohen.
No. Alderson's definitely involved. He is we're making recommendations and helping do the research, but Alderson, that's one thing that like Jared Porter and Zack Scott were very valuable to Alderson, is they were connectors to a younger generation of people. Like when Sandy had the GM job, it was his right-hand men were Paul DePodesta and JP Ricciardi, who are not of that current generation either. So I think that, it's not that hard for any of them to like ask around like, hey, who's good? But I wouldn't say that Alderson or Cohen necessarily has his ear to the ground as well as some others for that kind of thing. But it's not hard to find out who the names are if you're
right. So kind of a general question of the names that you've reported on so far that you could say, yeah, they're not coming here. Is that organizational choice after an interview, or are the Mets getting, people who, aren't interested in the job and not taking interviews?
Well, I think there's some of that. Sure. A part of this is that one of the reasons they're trying to go so quiet on this is that every time something doesn't work out, it's for their poor wounded fans, wounded for good reason over the years, like, see, nobody wants to come here. It's like, that does happen in a job search. Like, talk to someone, it's not the fit, But I've written about this before. There are very real concerns about working with or for Steve Cohen that some people have. Some people are risk averse. Like, and you know what? I got a nice house and my kids are in school here in a different place and I don't want to leave. And there's some of that. Personally, I think it's a pretty darn good job. And you could sign a 4-year contract, make millions and millions of dollars. And the absolute worst case scenario is that you're miserable and that you leave in 4 years with millions and millions of dollars. So I think that some people are risk averse. Many people in this industry, young people especially, are risk averse to a fault. Steve Cohen or Sandy Alderson comes calling me and I would want to do it. This is what, I know we're going to get into this, I think. This is what Billy Beane was so fired up about when he called me last week. It's like, don't people understand what a good opportunity this is? But people are skittish about Cohen. At least some people are. There were certainly rumors going around that Alderson wanted to promote his son, Bryn, their assistant GM. And that was something that some candidates were talking about, but that's not the case. But that got into the bloodstream a little bit last week. It's a perception becomes reality in a way kind of thing. Because even though that wasn't happening, that was something that the industry was sort of talking about. So those are some of the impediments.
I like how, because I was going to ask you about Billy Beane. I like how he's like, don't people understand how great of a gig this is? I'm not going to take it per se, but it's a
fair enough.
Like, if it was that great of a job, I feel like he would take it.
Well, this is his point to that. He's like, he is in such a good spot in his life where he doesn't even need the job because of Sandy Alderson. So why wouldn't someone else want to put themselves on that track? That was what he was saying. Like, he is almost 60 years old. He's got just everything works for him. And to his great credit, this isn't a quote, but he's basically like, I'm rich enough. Yeah, I could get richer doing this, but how am I going to tell my kids that this is for them or for the family? It's like everyone's already taken care of. So it's not like I need to be like, kids, in order to put food on the table, I need to move you to the East Coast. It's like, you don't need that. And the whole reason he went from a washout player to a fabulously wealthy, iconic executive was because Sandy Alderson mentored him. So why in God's name would young man number 6 or whoever with the Milwaukee, Cleveland Guardians or whoever you might be with not want to do that for themselves like Billy Beane has done for him? Maybe one day Shiloh Pitt will play you in a movie. If you were Shiloh Pitt's a boy, right?
I wouldn't have known Shiloh, so I don't know.
That's Shiloh's one of their children. Anyway, like what? So Beane was like, what are these people, nuts? It worked pretty good for me.
Well, here's a counterpoint to that. Billy Beane instills in his children the life lesson that you can never get too comfortable, that you should always strive to, I'm going to quote Bruce Springsteen, which I'm sure will upset you, but, you can't start a fire worrying about your little world falling apart. You have to.
Is that the one that goes Harry Truman, Doris Day, Red, China, Johnny Ray, South
No,
Pacific?
that's a
Because
different.
one
Not
thing people don't
related to
understand about
fire.
Springsteen is that Billy Joel is pretty good. Springsteen is pretty good, and they're on the same level, and they want to make Springsteen some kind of Bob Dylan figure. That's the problem.
Okay, well, that's not. I didn't ask for your opinion on Bruce Springsteen. However, here it is.
You sort of solicited it.
So that's true. I got it. I had it.
Poked at me.
So that's kind of my counterpoint to that. It's like, yeah, Billy Beane has a great gig, but at the same time, if he really wanted it, he's got a chance at winning a championship in Oakland, but it hasn't happened despite his brilliance. And I think if he were to want to challenge himself and prove to himself that he can work under the constraints of a different ownership and front office structure, I think it would be an interesting challenge for him personally. And I think it would teach his kids that, no matter how successful you get, keep grinding.
I'm going to address that, but I'm just getting from the control room in my ear here that Shiloh Pitt is a girl. So apologies to the Pitt Jolie family, however fractured it may be. I didn't mean to add any additional stress to that family.
And Jeff also, again, from the control room, didn't understand that you're quoting "We didn't start the fire" was a joke.
What I'm saying is that Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen are on the same level and they're both fine, but people want to make Springsteen more than that.
In your opinion. No, it's in your opinion. Sometimes you put out your opinion as fact, and it's very subjective.
Not in this case.
Not right.
I see what you're saying, but not when it comes to Springsteen.
You make a decent point. However, you're wrong.
Did you notice that Springsteen has really taken a turn visually? For a while, it was like, and this isn't a dig at his music. For a while, it was like, I can't believe Bruce Springsteen is like late 60s. Now, all of a sudden, he looks like an old man. Something just shit, like he just crossed the line.
Well, I mean, if you've seen him, like I went to go see his Broadway play.
I'm so sorry.
He does not look like an old man, Andy.
When I see him photographed, he went from that is a robust, like I was like, is this guy on steroids? But now he looks frail and older.
Jeff wants us to mention that his text was a joke. All right.
Well, anyway, your point about Billy Beane. I guess if you have your priorities straight, winning a World Series isn't as big of a deal as keeping your kids happy and comfortable. That's a professional goal versus a personal one, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. You're listening to the Shea Anything podcast brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network. More people relying only on Verizon. Let's see. What aspect of this should we get to next? Brian Sabean. So Harp wrote a column about this last week. Our colleague John Harper kind of just throwing out a suggestion, maybe he'd be interested. And then, others wrote about it and his potential interests. And this is a guy who the foundation that he built with the Giants, that was borderline dynasty in the early 2010s, is still, Farhan Zaidi's regime is still benefiting from Brandon Belt and Buster Posey and what he left behind. Having said that, look, he's been out of the game. He and Bruce Bochy both seem like kind of the opposites of the guys who are getting hired these days. Is that the correct read on the situation, Andy, or is there more to it?
Yeah, no, I'd be very, 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 very shocked if that happened with the Mets.
So the only reason that I, in my brain, have kind of made up the fact that it might be possible is if the Mets are interviewing those 32, 35-year-old, whatever, GM candidates who, this would be probably a promotion for them, maybe a lateral move. Couldn't they hire somebody like Sabean as a president of baseball ops, and that not being, their only hire, hire somebody else who they believe in to be a, young, promising executive to fill that GM role, but have somebody who's done this before in the role above him and him or her, and see if that, that foundation makes sense.
They could. I think I'm not belittling the experience of a Sabean personally. I think that people like that have a lot to add and are undervalued in the game, but you just don't see someone with that profile being asked to lead a baseball department nowadays. could someone like that be asked to be senior advisor? Maybe. Like there was a guy named Jerry Hunsicker who actually spent a long time in the Mets front office, who's kind of more of an older scouting guy. And when Andrew Friedman first took over the Rays when he was very young, their owner, Stuart Sternberg, made Jerry Hunsicker like the babysitter, basically, because Friedman's like this young kid from Wall Street at the time. He might not even be 30. And so that there's precedent for that kind of thing. Actually, Alderson was considering bringing in Billy Epler, the former Angels GM and Yankees executive, to help with like Jared Porter and Zack Scott at one point, but that didn't go through. But yeah, that idea of bringing in someone more seasoned absolutely could work.
Yeah. And I think your point's a good one, that advisor could be a title too. And that's kind of where I'm envisioning this person, on their day-to-day is not necessarily that, a Brian Sabean would lead this Mets franchise in a new direction, but that, under his tutelage, somebody else would. But again, Sandy Alderson's already there. And I know that he's trying to, focus more on the job that he originally took, which is totally fair and for a good reason. But look, I think it will be interesting, Andy, and you can tell me if you think this is unrealistic. If we get to the end of this and the GM meetings arrive and the winter meetings arrive and whatever happens with the work stoppage, whatever, but if the only hire they make is a young GM, would that surprise you?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So
that's the way this is going.
Let's say they hire somebody, right, who's 34 and relatively inexperienced, but an up and comer in a front office. And, he meets with the media and we ask him, hey, what are you thinking about a qualifying offer to Conforto, Syndergaard, et cetera? That person will be the face of the Mets front office moving forward.
Yeah. Yes.
So interesting. Mentally, I have not pictured that yet. I had been thinking that there would be some sort of in between that person and Sandy Alderson.
Well, it's like Zack Scott was last summer.
Right, but that's such by accident.
Yeah, but he was good at it, and it worked. And Alderson was. There's this false perception out there that Alderson wants to be pulling the strings, but he didn't at all. He stepped aside when Zack Scott had a little bit of time in there, and he was more than happy to delegate. Zack Scott made the Baez trade, and actually, Alderson wouldn't have made that trade. That was like, all right, you're the acting GM. That's your trade. Go for it. I don't even necessarily think Alderson would have liked that trade. He came to appreciate Baez later, but that was a Zack Scott trade. So that's the kind of, and when he started giving press conferences, you've been like, I've never heard of Zack Scott 6 months ago. And now here he is, the face of the team in that way. And that's how it will be for the next person, whether it's Ian Levin internally, whether it's Matt Arnold from the Brewers, whether it's David Spampanato from the SNY research team. It will be somebody who is giving those press conferences.
Spamp gets a mention on this podcast every once in a while. Good for him.
Well, he you know what? He can handle.
He's also a very smart baseball guy. So
that's what I'm saying. That's why it just popped into my head.
A good front office employee. So quick housekeeping thing, Andy. What's going on with Zack Scott, to your knowledge? And will he be? I mean, I don't know what his situation is in court, but let's say he's acquitted. Is he going to be part of this thing?
Well, that is being considered. The court date that he has, I want to say December 7th, the trial date that he has should be, from what I understand, sort of the beginning of the end of his legal situation. And if he is given, say, a traffic violation or whatever, instead of a DWI, I'm speculating at that point, it becomes an issue, not of a legal problem, but of an optics problem, right? Like this guy got himself in trouble when the Mets were in a difficult time, and can we really bring him back? And sure, clearly his bosses were not thrilled at that time that he did that. I definitely think it's believed in the Mets organization that they're better in baseball ops with Zack Scott contributing. And as far as how he would contribute would be, they have to let his situation play out in the courts. They have to make sure that there's nothing else they don't know that could bite them later. They've had some bad experiences with that over the past year. They have to make sure that's all good. And if it is, then they have to consider, okay, we have an employee who made a mistake. That mistake is now resolved in the legal system when it is. And what do we do? And I can tell you that they have not decided that yet. And right now it's in a holding pattern.
It's a very tricky situation. To your point, you have an employee who made a mistake. It happens to be a very public mistake at this point, but he has not gone through a trial. So the Mets, even from an HR standpoint, I'm sure have a lot of hoops to jump through there with that situation. But I do think it's important to bring up just the fact that he's still there and technically hasn't been,
he hasn't been fired. Yeah, he's been on administrative leave, obviously, this whole time. He has not been active in the front office. He's not been in the loop of what's going on. He has literally been, you go over there and leave until this gets figured out. And then when it is, unfortunately for him, a hire might have been made by that point, and then it has, like that person will be influential, or perhaps determinative on whether or not Scott gets to stay. And he's also a person with free will, and maybe at that point, okay, I'm going to go work with some other colleagues in some other organization. We'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah. How much generally of a rush are the Mets in right now to get this done?
Not a rush. And nor should they be. It's a big decision. And you just have to make a good, smart decision. The idea of making a splash and the idea that this is a public thing is unfortunately counterproductive to making a good, sound, process-based decision. And they're trying to go underground. They're trying to not say much. I mean, so much of the information that I've gotten here is from just people all over the league hearing things and then me checking it out. I mean, people think it's as simple as like leaks, whatever that is, but they are really trying to keep it quiet and are not happy when I find something out, because they just want to take the temperature down on this, because it just needs to be something that they have some time and space to try to get right. And it's about Steve Cohen trying to figure out who he wants to partner with for many years to come in this baseball organization that he now owns. So they should not, one would hope they're not in a rush.
So you think that you think it turns out that they really want this to be as low profile as possible. And so when you find out information, you're almost like, like you just said, I'm not.
Well, I am. No, I'm thrilled when I find out.
I thought you said I'm not happy.
No, they're not happy.
Okay.
Excuse me if I misspoke or if that.
No, maybe I misheard you, but they want you to not be paying attention. They
want nobody to be paying attention. So it is a public facing business, right? It's not a bank that they're running here or something. Like they have fans, they're customers that pay the bills, want to know. So that's what we're here for, to help those people find out. But my point is that they made a big miscalculation by ever making it known that they were looking for a president of baseball operations. That never should. If I'm them, I'm glad that it was not easy, but I'm glad that it was doable to find this stuff out. Like they're talking to Billy Beane, they talked to Theo Epstein, it didn't work out. That worked out for me or whoever else. I'm not the only person successfully reporting on this, but for them, it set up the perception that they failed at something. No one ever had to know that they were even thinking about this. It could have just been like, yeah, we've got Alderson, we've got Levin and Bryn Alderson and Tommy Tanis and this good organization and Ben Zosmer, who they've already hired from the Dodgers to run their analytics. A big Dodger hire. It's already happened, people. And they could have just been like, and now we move forward with our qualifying offer decisions and talking to Baez's agent and da-da-da. No, by the way, we hired this new executive. It didn't have to be this big storyline. They messed up by letting that be known. So now they're trying to pull it back. To
be fair, there's nothing for you guys also to report on, because there's no sense reporting on whether they're going to give Syndergaard a qualifying offer, because whoever's going to make that decision isn't even in place yet.
Yeah, but they didn't have to frame it that way. It could have been like, Alderson's the acting GM. We're waiting for Zack Scott's situation to play out. We have an organization. We may add someone to the front office this winter. It could have been that. We never had to hear the name Billy Beane or Theo Epstein.
Let's throw out.
They said they were looking for a president of baseball operations. Now they're not. So really, unless they have to give someone that title, why did they ever have to go public and say that? That was their mistake. And they actually don't need one. They never needed one. They never needed, like, if Billy Beane or Theo Epstein wants to come to your organization, of course you have that conversation and you're very open to it. But the way their organization is set up, they never needed some big hire to come in. It's just completely unnecessary for the structure that they have. In fact, counterproductive in a way, because it would have set their organization back a year, because they already made so much progress building out an infrastructure over the past 12 months. They never needed this. And they messed up by saying that they needed it.
Okay, you're on the record with that opinion.
Now that's not my Springsteen opinion. This is an informed, non-hot take analysis of the situation that I'm working day in.
No, I agree.
No, I know, but I'm saying, like, they know they messed up. Why else do you think they're being so quiet right now?
Last question I want to ask you is the one that really matters. Are you hearing anything in terms of the CBA? Any rumors in terms of whether there will be a stoppage on December 1st?
Yes. First, I'm going to give our readers a little tip, because it's not the most well-known association.
Not readers, listeners.
Our listeners, excuse me. Well, if you want to read something as well, because he doesn't broadcast, Ronald Blum of the Associated Press is the reporter to follow on labor issues. He's so plugged in with MLB and the union. So I'll lead with what he reported yesterday. I'm serious. This is the guy to follow on this above any name you've heard. And he reported that it's almost certain that there will be a lockout on December 1st, which is noteworthy because there had been some thought that even if they didn't have a deal by the deadline's the end of November, then they might just kind of extend the negotiating window and keep the offseason going. But Blum is hearing that will not be the case. So that's significant. That means the winter meeting is going to be all messed up and it's going to be a whole deal for a while. And it means that free agency, fun, real fun. It means that free agency is going to be very weird this year and all that kind of stuff. Now, I will add what I've heard, because I have sources that are in the middle of this kind of thing. And this doesn't contradict what Blum at the AP reported, but there is optimism, and this isn't going to be some big, awful industry ruining thing. Basically, people are gearing up for some posturing, for some saber rattling, and ultimately,
it's been way too long since I heard saber rattling.
We had that saber rattling was a big May-June 2020 term.
Dark times.
Kicked around.
Sabers
are back out. They're being sharpened right now. They haven't rattled yet. They'll rattle. But the expectation as of right now is that there will be a new agreement with incremental changes, and life will go on. And hopefully that will stay the case. One source made a very interesting point. He said, this is very inside baseball, but that Dick Monfort, the owner of the Colorado Rockies, is in charge of the labor relations committee at MLB for owners. And he's signing players. He just is CJ Crone, and the Rockies have done a few things already. Do you really think that Dick Monfort would be paying players money if he thought that the system was a complete mystery and that it wouldn't be resolved in relatively short order? So I thought that was an interesting point. We also thought it wouldn't be that bad during the pandemic, because there's a pandemic and there's racial strife in the streets and all this stuff. MLB can't possibly, and the union can't possibly be dumb enough to get this mad at each other. And then they did. So once these egos get involved and the war is on, you never know.
Narrator voice. They were.
Right. But there's some optimism right now that it will be a lockout, but not too terrible.
Reminder to subscribe to the Shea Anything podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening. We appreciate it. Another reminder that Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets, from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Good newsy episode, Andy. We appreciate your insight. We will talk to everybody next week. Thanks for listening.